Okay, hi everybody, and thank you for joining the myAyu community class. This is our last class of August 2023, and we have a nice little group here today of folks who have been with us and working in myAyu for at least 6 months or more, which is great. We want to try to cover the overall plan of Ayurvedic treatment and approach today, and so I'm going to speak to that initially and then open up for any questions or comments. And periodically I'll try to also make time and space for questions or comments if you have any as we go through. So as everybody at this point knows, here in this group at least, Ayurveda is a highly personalized system that allows us to identify risk factors, current states of health and or disease, and many other details about what we should do in terms of recommendations and changing states of health. And those recommendations come from being informed by what the current presentation is, as well as what the person has a tendency to do day in and day out. So one of the important things to know about using Ayurveda for personal health and well-being is that we have to take personal responsibility from the start. And that includes our responsibility for choices that we make every day for food and lifestyle habits that span pretty much everything that we do. We also need to know that there are certain times that are better than others to engage in certain types of dietary choices or lifestyle habits. And doing all of the recommended things, or what the internet would say is good for you, doing all of that all the time is not the way that it's going to produce positive results. So that's kind of where we are able to narrow that down and say, okay, here's what your current state is. Here's step one, right? So we got to kind of focus in on working on a few things, specific diet and lifestyle recommendations, and then we move on to step 2, step 3, step 4, and so on. And it may go on indefinitely. Why? Because seasons are always changing. The state of the person is always changing, as in they are aging. The stressors around them are always changing as well. And so no 2 days of a person's life will be the same. And we have to really take that into consideration when we approach this, because it can be very challenging for a lot of people to think, hey, wait a minute, okay, they just told me that I should eat oatmeal for breakfast. Now they said I should eat eggs. Now they said I should eat vegetables. What is going on? I don't understand. Why is this always changing? And that's a very common thing that people run into, especially as they start to use Ayurveda for the first couple months. So I'd like to back up and try to give you a bit of an overview as to what these stages of progression are. These are going to be very generalized, that will apply to a large portion of the population that are, let's say, not experiencing optimal health and well-being. That's probably the majority. So in our first step, what we ideally need to do is we need to understand what is going on. We need to understand the medical history of the person, what health issues they're most likely predisposed to, and then most importantly, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis that may be contributing or detracting from their current state of health. We take all that in kind of like an equation, and then we calculate, hey, you are going to get the most bang for your buck if you remove X, Y, and Z foods first and replace them with something else. Or the recommendations may be just drink freshly boiled hot water, especially around meal times. So they can be very complex recommendations, or they can be very, very simple. And for the most part, we try to make them as simple as possible so that people can actually do them. Now, your idea of simple may be very different from my idea of simple, right? And that would go for everybody here in this room. So we really have to do a lot of work to understand what does simple mean to you, and then help you achieve that. And so that is where the personalization really comes in. But the themes of that very first stage are really to try to achieve as much digestion of waste products as possible that are available to be digested and then eliminated in the human body at that point in that individual. That sounds very complicated and probably doesn't even make any sense. Let's get an example going here so you can try to see what this might look like. Let's say a person has just been going about their daily life, say they're even in their early 30s, and they haven't really had to suffer from many health issues as of yet. They're kind of luckily moving along. They eat pretty well, they exercise pretty well, but they also like to enjoy their life, and so they go out with their friends a lot and they have a good time a lot. And so lo and behold, people had birthday parties every single weekend for a month or two in a row, right? And you can make this any event that you want to be. The key is that the person goes and enjoys, as we want them to do, but they enjoy maybe a little too much. They go a little too overboard. They have a few too many slices of cheesecake or whatever the birthday cake is. They may have a couple drinks along with that. They may not even have any drinks, and whatever it is. But whatever the combination of things is that goes into them over that period of time is too much for their body to handle. That's the theme. Okay, so overindulgence. And so part of step one is to identify what that overindulgence cause is, and then take steps necessary to undo it and help the body rid itself of the excess waste that is generated in that overindulgence process. Does that make sense so far? Great. So what we see a lot in step one are things like dietary restrictions. And these restrictions mostly come around meal timing and meal quantities. The next most important thing is going to be combinations of foods. And we try to do this as simply as possible. So we'll say have 1 grain, 1 protein, and a couple of vegetables cooked properly, not necessarily together, but in a way in which all 3 of those different types of things, the grain, the protein, and the vegetables, can work together synergistically to create a digestible meal. Okay, so examples of that could be as easy as steamed rice, steamed broccoli, and stir-fried chicken, or sautéed chicken, or oven-roasted chicken, or rotisserie chicken from the supermarket. And that's where we really want to start off with. Now, it may seem a little extreme to go from the normal kind of American diet of enjoying lots of variety of things, and especially the challenges coming up against this from pretty much everything you hear in mainstream culture and media, that more is better. So we need to address that right from the start, or realistically, like as soon as possible. The sooner a person gets on board with just saying, okay, maybe I don't totally understand, but I'm just going to suck it up and do it anyways for a couple weeks and let me see what happens. The sooner they can latch onto that and do it, the sooner the whole process moves forward. And I've seen this in quite a number of people. Some are very quick to just say, oh, okay, I signed up for this program, I'm going to do it, and boom, they just follow right along and they do it exactly as we've asked them to try. And then there's other people that they just can't give it up. You know what I mean? And that more is better mentality is so deeply ingrained in them, and that's fine. It just delays moving forward in the whole process. And I want that to be clear from the start, because one of the other questions we get a lot is, well, Ayurveda doesn't work. Why not? Why haven't we been able to do more? Why haven't we been able to get, certain formulations? Because frankly, they won't work until we get stage 1 sorted out properly. So we have to bring this person's baseline down to almost like the bare minimum. Simple foods, on time, the right amount. And this goes on as long as is necessary for that person's body to click over into a clean metabolic state so that they're no longer generating waste products, or they're generating minimal waste products with every digestive event, meaning every meal that they're consuming. And what that does is it gives the body a little extra energy to say, hey, okay, this meal came in, it was so easy to digest that now I have, just for any number's sake, 25% extra digestive power remaining, and I can go off and burn some of the other junk that's lying around. Right? So this is a constant catch up in that sense of what is that waste load that we're starting with? How do we minimize intake for a long enough period of time so that overall waste load reduces and the two are hand in hand? And now we have properly tuned digestion and metabolism with minimal waste being produced. When we reach this point, now we kind of go on to the next stage, and that is figuring out exactly what we're dealing with. And what we're dealing with is usually a presentation of some sort of chronic disease for most people. And people may ask right now, well, wait a minute, isn't that what we were trying to do at the beginning? Like, most people think they go to a doctor or they go to some healthcare professional and they say, they come with their diagnosis. I am this problem. I wear this badge. Help me address this. But that actually acts as a blinder that prevents them from seeing the whole picture. And so we try to take that focus away from looking at just that diagnosis and look at this holistic picture and try to now align diet, lifestyle, sleep, everything else, routine, in such a way so that we can clearly see what that chronic picture is. So when we get to stage 2, now we are looking at the chronic picture. Now the real treatment can start. Now we can start using formulations that are going to address that chronic issue in any sort of number of ways. And in Ayurveda, there are 3 general ways of doing that. The first is eliminating the causative waste products that are allowing the foundation for that disease to take place, eliminating those from their nearest route of exit. And that is a very specific definition that aligns to the Sanskrit term shodhana, which means eliminating the doshas or the waste products. And when it's done in the context of panchakarma, then we eliminate them from their nearest route of exit. That's a very elaborate process to do classical panchakarma. It's not for the faint of heart, and we're not going to go into that discussion today. But just know that that is one of the main formats. And it's not only panchakarma that lets us do this elimination. We can also do elimination on a low basis, a slow basis, a day-by-day basis. And classically, that is called nitya virechana. Nitya means daily, little by little. So the second format is called Shamana, and that is where we try to normalize the doshas. We try to normalize the physiological switches and dials that produce the physical body and its demonstration or exertion of energy physically and mentally on a day-to-day basis. So we have dials, tuners almost, that let us adjust how the body is going to be produced. Many of the Ayurvedic formulations that will be able to reach into that level of adjusting those dials will only work as long as metabolism is working. And so when we get to stage 2, one of the pitfalls that is waiting for people is that the dietary and lifestyle adjustments that were made in stage 1 to get that big load of waste down initially, all those dietary and lifestyle adjustments usually have to be maintained during stage 2 as well. However, we will start to see in stage 2 a little bit of an expansion of diet, so where we may have eliminated, quite a variety of foods, we now start to bring those back, or we start to bring back more appropriate foods in stage 2. And meal formats can become a little more complex, meaning that we can use more than just a couple of vegetables, or we can start to bring back more spices and a little more flavoring and a little more, more ingredients that are going to create a satisfying meal in stage 2, as long as it doesn't go overboard. So as we're working on dialing these switches in throughout the body, throughout all these different levels of metabolism in the body, the person will start to feel better. But it's not like one day for the next, hey, suddenly that pain that was there for 25 years is now gone and it's never coming back. Unfortunately, it's not that good in the sense that, I don't know that any system of medicine can provide such instantaneous seeming results in that way. What we do see is that chronic issues start to fade away. They fade off into the distance until suddenly one day a person wakes up and says, wow, it's really gone. Then the next day they wake up and say, oh, actually it's back a little bit. So I just want to set expectations properly and make sure that as you go through your own process, you know what to look out for and you get a sense of what is, am I on the right track or not? How do I know if I'm improving or not? And during the stage 2 period of actually adjusting these dials and making these corrections, while the person's still living, while they're still trying to go about their day-to-day business and live their normal life, they expect us to get under the hood, readjust everything, and boom, they're just going to come flying out like a rocket, right? So sometimes what I try to do is remind people that you probably wouldn't bring your car to the auto mechanic and say, hey, I really need to get my oil changed, but if you could do that while I'm still driving on the highway to work at 80 miles an hour, I'd really appreciate it. So we have to tune our own expectations appropriately as we go through these processes. And if a person really genuinely wants to, overcome chronic illness, they've got to be ready to make adjustments. I think many of you in this process, you have already been through that. You already know what it's like to make these changes. And with some other folks that unfortunately aren't here today, I was hoping they would be though, because there's so many people that go through and do this and they say, I don't want to eat that for breakfast. Really? That sounds gross. No, and they will kick and fight and scream, maybe not directly, outwardly, but inside, they're just every fiber in their being thinks this is so wrong. Why am I doing this? But lo and behold, a couple weeks later, they realize, hey, I feel a lot better. And a few more weeks go by after that, and this all rolls into a couple of months, and maybe 6 months later, they say, no, I would never stop doing this because I feel so much better. And so if you don't try, you'll never know. And that's really the trick with this. It's hard. Nobody can convince anybody else to do this. Nobody can say, you are going to get X, Y, Z results by doing this, unless you give it a try. All right, so stage 2 is tricky. We have to maintain, we have to learn to enjoy living life in what is in many ways very new and very against or opposite to what mainstream media and mainstream culture puts out there as, you know, the way to live and the way to be. We have to, you know, find any ways that we can to help stabilize ourselves physically and mentally and emotionally as we go through that process. And a lot of it can come in group sessions like this and seeing others experience these same things and talking about it, sharing those experiences, right? So let me just talk quickly about the last stage and then we'll open it up to any comments. So the last general stage, stage 3, is the stage of regeneration. So in stage 1, we really brought the total waste load down. We tuned metabolism so that these formulations can work. Stage 2, we get in there and we tinker with all of the dials and try to correct things. And in stage 3, now we want to seal it up and help keep it at the most youthful, healthy state possible for the rest of that person's life. So you might wonder, will the stage 3 ever end? Right? Say, is there some sort of formulation or method out there that a person can do, and if they do it for a year, they're set. You know, they're good for the next 50 years. I wish. And if there were, I think we might have a lot more people coming to do this. But no, unfortunately, this is stuff that needs to be done as long as the person is alive. And that is also what is explicitly stated in classical literature. To practice Ayurveda is not just, you know, a one-off type of thing. That's not just do something when it's convenient for the person, like take a pill after a meal and go about whatever they are doing. But it's really a lot of self-observation and planning for the future. And if you do want to see yourself healthy in older age and making the most out of your old age, and not even just old age, but for the entirety of your lifespan, using Ayurveda early on is going to help set you up for that sooner rather than later. And so this regeneration stage can go on for a long time. There are different ways of doing it, just like we talked about dialing in the doshas, like in stage 2, tinkering with everything, that there's the elimination, the sort of pacification or normalization approach, and then there is actually the regenerative approach. So within the regenerative approach, there are very compressed, like intense types of regenerative therapies mentioned in classical literature that I would say are totally out of reach of maybe no more than 3% of them, or they're only available to probably 3% of the population or less, to be perfectly honest, maybe even 1%, because they involve staying in a very restricted place, like a hospital essentially, or a clinic, for at least 3 months at a stretch. Most people just don't have that amount of time, nor do they have the funds to finance being away and staying in a place like that. So we're not going to go into those types of regenerative treatments in detail. But thankfully, there are regenerative protocols that are intended to be used, as the classics say, while the person is exposed to wind and sun and the natural elements. So meaning while the person's going about their day-to-day business, there are regenerative protocols that can be used to help shore up their resources, to help enhance their immunity and keep them in a state of health as long as possible. And so those usually look very similar to the same formulations that we would use in stage 2, actually, in the sense that they may be pills, they may be tablets, they may be liquids, they may be medicated oils or ghees. There are even medicated alcohols in Ayurveda that can be used for that purpose. So there's a wide variety, thousands of different types of formulations, specific single named formulations. And if anything, it's more of a challenge to figure out which one is the right one. Okay, so does that help folks, does anybody have any questions?
It seems like at some point there's the potential of being in 3 and then jumping back into 2. It seems like that's probably a reality where you're doing pretty well and then maybe overdoing it or whatever, or as the whole process seems like you would have periods where you'd go back and forth a little bit.
Definitely, Judy. Thank you for mentioning that. It unfortunately is not a linear process all the time, and there's even a lot of periods where we go from stage 2 back into stage 1, or stage 3 back into stage 1, and the whole thing is more probably like a circle than anything else. It's kind of like your dog or your cat chasing its tail. And even as, even the best people out there who are the most compliant and really up on top of everything, even they are going to experience some amount of ill health at some point. So nobody's immune from that. And we have to kind of, I guess, accept that as part of the process as well. The challenge with this is also that there's no way to know. And I think this is one of the most frustrating things about individual health. A person is plagued with some sort of disease, or they're not, and they're just trying to achieve their optimal state of well-being. They choose a certain path, right? They decide, oh, this sounds like I want to, functional medicine is a good example. They've gained a lot of popularity over the years, and they've gotten great results with a lot of people. So more people come flocking and signing up and trying it, and for a lot of people it will work, and for some portion of people it won't work. And you'll, like I said at the beginning, right? You'll never know until you try. And that, unfortunately, is the truth, I think, with all healthcare approaches. So, as you're navigating this kind of ping-ponging effect, the best thing you can do to prepare yourself for that is know, how do I feel on a good day? And how do I feel on a bad day? And you need to be able to say, this is a good day, or this is a bad day, or this is somewhere in the middle. The more you know what you are experiencing, and the more you can interpret that effectively and respond in real time with the right diet, with the right lifestyle choices, with all the right steps involved, the better off you're going to be, regardless of healthcare system. So I think Ayurveda offers a lot in that sense, because it is really about using what I sometimes call a very primitive system. We don't have any fancy tools and technology. We still prepare medicines by beating these things with sticks and stones. You know what I mean? Like, this is old school. And there's nothing wrong with that. It still works. Why fix it if it ain't broke? So we have to rely on our senses. And you are the best judge of your own experience. I am only here to help you learn how to communicate what you're experiencing, how to understand what you're experiencing, and how to respond to it effectively. Your SA, same thing. And they're going to help you out even more with recipes, with specific instructions on how to live in a healthy way on a day-to-day basis. Because that's really the heart of all of this, is knowing how to live well for yourself. All right? Any other questions or comments?
I just want to say I was one of those that was really kicking and screaming, sometimes hard to let things go, understand what simplicity was. And it has really been an amazing transformation for me since last October. And Jessica, this is a great format that you've shared today, because I didn't have that understanding of the steps. And that would have been really probably helpful. So I'm really excited for those who are going to be hearing this and learning that it is a process and it is steps. And the beginning is really, it's very challenging because it's a new way of being and becoming aware. And it has helped me to connect to myself and understand what you just talked about, knowing ourselves and understanding how we feel, and remembering that it's going to be unique for every individual, and trusting that and learning to trust ourselves and my intuition and understanding what feels good when, and trusting that. And that's developing as I go along. So for me, that's been the key thing that Ayurveda has provided, and I'm grateful. So thank you.
Awesome, Terry. Thank you so much for being here and for sticking it out, because it's hard. It's hard. And there's so many reasons that we can come up with for why it's hard and why it's unsurmountable, right? But at the end of the day, you choose to still keep going. And that's a reflection of your commitment to yourself. So congratulations. You've done really an amazing job over the last 6 months. And I'm very impressed with the results you've made.
Thank you. And I just wanted, you said something that was really key. Oh, hard, about it being hard. The thing I also learned is that change only comes with the challenge and the discomfort. And that's where I find the greatest change. So that was a good thing to keep reminding myself. The hardness will bring about the greatest step of change, I think.
Very good. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Cheryl, go ahead.
I have never had a doctor person ever tell me that the issues I had been dealing with for 20, 30 years, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, all of that, could be addressed besides with a whole bunch of pills. So living with that for 30 years and visiting different people of different modalities, etc., has been my journey. And so just to hear you say, let's try, let's go after this. And so 1.5 years later, we're still going after it. And it's challenging, but I really also appreciate this format today to remind us where we've been and maybe where we're heading. And like Judy said, and we're going to flip back and forth, and in any given day, any given hour, we're going to be wherever we are. But now we can assess where that is and make changes or adjustments, etc. So I'm super grateful.
Excellent, Cheryl. Thank you so much for sticking through it as well. And it's so fun to watch all of you make these changes, live these changes, get these experiences, and share that with us, and get to see, you know what I mean, how these changes affect you, and for better or for worse in some situations, of course. And that's also part of the process, right? Learning what specifically is right for you. And it doesn't mean that every single thing we try is going to be an improvement. And oftentimes we're going to try certain things that are going to flare something up. It's going to be uncomfortable. And that is how we get better at honing in on exactly what this thing is doing, where it is, how it works, right? Where it's trying to go, how it's trying to express itself. And I'm talking about the pathology, of course. And so it's incredibly important, especially in this online format, where, actually in this group, I think I have met all of you in person, which is unusual. But for most people, right, we never get to actually meet in person. And so I know from here up about the person, right? I know them from paperwork, from their medical doctor that talks about labs, from what they're expressing and saying in that short window of time once a month. And so it's very hard to come to definitive scientific conclusions based on only that. And so Ayurveda has an entire system of testing called upashaya and anupashaya. That means things that produce a positive result and things that produce a negative result. And as we go down that list and we find, okay, garlic, put that in the Anupashaya list, meaning that that's not good for the person right now. They had a flare-up, they had a reaction. As soon as we get that information, now to the Ayurvedic professional who knows all about how garlic changes physiology in a healthy and unhealthy state in the body, can now suddenly calculate a whole bunch more about how the body's working. So this is another very important hurdle to overcome. Thank you, Cheryl, so much for mentioning this. A lot of people, consciously or subconsciously, will come to a healthcare system or a modality or some sort of thing with the perhaps unspoken assumption that what they are going to do is instantaneously going to produce positive results. And when they don't get that, something must be wrong. Go away from that thing. And that's normal. That's human nature to respond in that way. So one other thing we have to learn to overcome is that part of this process, a large part of this process, requires just kind of bulldozing that line of things to test and trying each one as methodically and scientifically as possible and reporting the results as objectively as possible. And that's where we narrow down and identify exactly what's going on. And that's when we can say this is the right formulation to use, or that's the right treatment to do, or this is the diet and lifestyle to follow, etc. So being able to mentally and physically withstand the discomfort of experiencing things that don't always work is absolutely key to getting the result as we go through this process. And so one other thing that's actually a very common, I'll give an example of a very common issue that we notice with this is with sleep. When we start making diet and lifestyle changes, what happens is that the body's clock, its circadian rhythm, which is just a very general term for hundreds, if not thousands, of little clocks in the body that all have to synchronize on a daily and nightly basis to keep this great machine running well. As we start making these changes in diet and lifestyle, say out of 1,000 clocks, 300 are not syncing up with everything else. So we make some changes, maybe 100 of those get fixed. We make some other changes, maybe 50 other ones get thrown off. So it's this constant up and down fluctuating process that's happening. And sleep is such an important asset. Sleep is probably your most valuable asset. If you do nothing else, make sure you sleep well as you can every day. And it's like, well, yeah, I wish I could, many people will say. That's the whole problem. Well, we have to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for good sleep in every way possible. Having good nightly hygiene, of winding down as it's getting dark out, of being in bed early enough so that when the body is ready to go to sleep, there's no excuses. There's no, oh man, now I got to get up and go do this before I go to bed, right? Which wakes the whole system back up, activates the nervous system, and kind of lights everything again to go on. We need to set the stage so that sleep is as easily accessible as possible. And so good sleep hygiene, which you can learn about from so many places on the internet today, like Huberman Labs podcast has a great sleep toolkit. That's a fantastic place to start with all the Western science explained behind it. That's a very easy and accessible way to get started. Once those things are set up, once the diet and lifestyle is set up, once everything else is on, if that problem persists, that's telling us that the nervous system is hyperactivated. It's on too high. Or some of the switches that are involved in thermogenesis that are related to pitta dosha are switched in the wrong direction. And in that kind of presentation, the person tends to not be able to fall asleep when they want to go to sleep at night, yet they are tired all day long. And they're wide awake at nighttime, and then they won't be able to fall asleep till about 4 or 5 in the morning. And that is the window where they get their best sleep. And so that's a known presentation. That's an early stage of what would be considered jwara, or connected to fever, in Ayurvedic literature. And so there are specific ways to manage that depending on, all the particulars about that person. But the whole theme behind that is nervous system regulation. And so making sure that things of too much excitement are not done, say after 6 p.m. Pick a number, right? What time do you want to be in bed by, and make sure that it happens so many hours before that. Don't get yourself amped up at 8 or 9 o'clock at night playing video games, watching fun stuff on TV, jumping up and down on the trampoline with your friends. Obviously, you're not going to be able to sleep very well if you're doing that, right? So that all kind of bundles in with the sleep hygiene stuff. But even anything, it could be even just, reading an exciting book. Whatever the trigger is for you, if that's getting your nervous system hyperactivated, say after 6 p.m., you may not be able to overcome that to sleep. So some of the very simple types of remedies that are actually popular in kind of commercial Ayurveda today, or New Age Ayurveda today, are things like drinking golden milk, which is milk simmered with things like turmeric, or better yet, saffron. Saffron is a much better choice for calming the nervous system and helping the person get a good night's sleep. Of course, with milks, we have so many varieties of dairy milk, different fat percentages, nut milks, and all that kind of stuff. So it's whatever kind of milk is most readily digestible is the right choice. And then infused with saffron strands. And just enough to help feel like you got a coating inside. Excuse me. And you feel calmed down before you go to bed. Okay, any other questions? Any other thoughts or questions? And Terry, you saw the comment there. You can just Google that and his sleep toolkit will come right up at the top. Now, when you go down the Western approach, they're usually going to also offer certain supplements and compounds that they have found through their research to be effective at helping to induce good quality sleep. That may or may not work. I can't really speak much to that from an Ayurvedic perspective. But it doesn't mean you can't try it. Just remember that whenever you're testing things, there's only so many things you can test at once. And ideally, if you want to know for sure, you want to get an accurate result, how many things, anybody know how many things you can? Yeah, one at a time. Okay, so that's why, another reason why this is a very slow process. If we really want to know, we have to be very diligent in our approach here and very careful, one thing at a time. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, then we can wrap it up for today. I really appreciate everybody attending, and I'm glad to hear that this was helpful, and always glad to hear about your perspective on this whole process now, 6 months in, 9 months in, 18 months in. How do you see this? And for you to be here this long and experience some of the things you're getting, one would have to assume at least part of that has to be positive. Otherwise, unlikely you'd still be hanging around. But take the good with the bad, take it all together, because that's what it is. It's all one big package. All right. And next Friday, I'm hoping to do another theme type class like this on Panchakarma, because we've got a couple people going through the process now and coming up to do it in the next 1 to 2 months. So I want to just give a little pep talk on that, maybe some reminders, and we may even have somebody willing and able to speak to their experience with it. I may even talk about some of my experiences with it, just so that folks can really start to understand, what is this thing, and is it worth considering, because it's a big commitment. All right. Okay, thanks everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.